All right, hello, good evening, everybody. Today marks our first Essential Career Skills session. This is Series 3, so for 2024 to 2025. This will be Session 1, covering communications. So to begin, a quick introduction of what the Essential Career Skills Series is. The Essential Career Skills Series serves to provide you guys means to be a preparation for your careers in the future. So what comes after your steps here at Purdue. So we'll go through some of the competencies that we focus on, and these will prepare you to become more career ready. So what exactly is becoming career ready? We'll cover some of the skills that define career readiness. So what that means is career readiness is a foundation from which to demonstrate requisite core competencies that broadly prepare the college educated for success in the workplace and lifelong career management. So what that means is for you college graduates in the future, it is the key to ensuring a successful entrance to the workforce. And it is simply a form of career currency. So what does it mean to achieve career readiness? There are three main areas. It's rigorous academic preparation. So what that means is discipline or skills that you've honed in classroom settings. So this could be your coursework, your labs, your research projects, and some academic or curricular-based projects. And these experiences will provide you a means of academic preparation. However, the second point, opportunity knowledge, this is mainly what this kind of a workshop would be like, this kind of a talk. These are skills and knowledge acquired outside of the classroom, so extracurricular. So it could be workshops from our department, it could be other forms of workshops from elsewhere as well. And then personal agency. This is more of taking your own responsibility and activating your own potential, seeking out some experiences to practice and put some of the skills that you've learned in the classroom or outside of class to practice. So this is kind of like combining both of those skills. So when we talk about lead competencies, or when we say competencies, what does that mean? So these are four main areas. There are 5 skills each within these areas, but today we'll be focusing on communication. So the 4 competencies are communication, self-awareness, collaboration, and ways of thinking. So kind of going over self-awareness is interpersonal awareness and development. Collaboration is interpersonal skills and intercultural knowledge. But we'll talk about that more in other sections. Today we'll just be focusing on communication. So one of the key areas of these 4 competencies that Purdue wants to develop is so that we become Boilermakers that are communicators, collaborators, self-aware, and thinkers. So these are kind of some keywords that you can use in your future career prep. So like say if you're in an interview, you can use these keywords. So in terms of the skills involved in communication, these are kind of the areas that we talk about in communication competencies. So it's mainly listen and observe, nonverbal communication, summarize and distill information, verbal sign communication, and written communication. And we'll kind of go into that in today's talk. So today we'll have Emily Ramos, who is a 2016 graduate of Purdue University with a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature and Professional Writing. So she currently works as a reference assistant at the Tippecanoe Co Public Library and as a founding member of the Indiana Task Force, which is a feminist direct action nonprofit group dedicated to community and political organizing through the framework of reproductive justice. In her work alongside other organizers, Emily has been responsible for helping Lafayette locals become elected officials. What that does is lobbying the Indiana legislators to adopt improved mental health infrastructure for all Hoosiers and to reject restrictions on our ability to protest, and also to express our First Amendment rights. And most recently, expanding some of their focus to access to reproductive health supplies in our local community through emergency contraception vending machines. As a library professional, Emily assists patrons to utilize technology and other library resources, both at the downtown branch of the library and in the wider community through a partnership with the Lafayette Transitional Housing Center, or LTHC. She is here today to talk about communication in a public service and organizing context. So without further ado, let's give her a warm welcome.
Point the clicker on there.
Great. Glad the clicker worked for me, even if it didn't want to work for Jeremy. Hi everyone. Hope you're having a good Wednesday. I almost said good morning, and it's not morning. Yeah, so as Jeremy said, my name's Emily, and I'm here to talk about communication in a more public sphere. So my little outline for today is we'll do about me, we'll go to the first two tenets of the competency, and then we'll make our way down to conclusions. So about me, I got my Bachelor of Arts in English, Lit, and Professional Writing in 2016 with minors in Political Science and Queer Studies. I didn't do all that work to not be able to say that every time. I work at the Josh and Holman branch of TCPL. It is in downtown Lafayette on South Street. It is our first and largest branch. And I am the Lafayette local organizer for Indiana Task Force Local 1. We were formerly a very local group called YWTF, Younger Women's Task Force, but we have since expanded statewide. I'm our creative director, and I function as our in-house graphic designer. So when I say communication, I was doing some research on these presentations, and because I was really feeling like I don't have skills, and so I wanted to see what people were talking about. So when I say communication, I want to acknowledge that communication has official and technical meanings, none of which I know off the top of my head, but I want to use the term in a very specific colloquial sense today, which is when I think about communication, I'm thinking about how do people make meaning together, how do we make a shared reality that we both or multiple people understand. So, how does communication happen? Our bodies and minds are processing and constantly absorbing hundreds of signals throughout the day, translating and navigating a sea of messages and meaning. Sometimes they're explicit. Stop. Road closed. One way. Please wait to be seated. Text me back. Can anyone think of any explicit communication or signs you might have seen on the way here today?
When you press the button, it tells you to wait, and it always says wait.
She really is serious. She's like, wait. Some are implicit. Cars are turning around before a specific intersection. I don't know why I was thinking about driving so much. I don't want to preface that. I don't know why, but it's cars are turning around before a specific intersection. Maybe that means something, maybe it doesn't. Usually it indicates something is ahead, or pulling or seeing people pull a very specific face, such as my favorite, the grimacing emoji. Can anyone think of any implicit messaging or communication you might have gotten today?
For example, on the street, coordinating between people, as in this means wait, or those kind of things, depending, you have to pay a lot of attention to what's happening in a specific environment.
Absolutely. We spend a lot of energy, I believe we spend a lot of energy noticing those things and making meaning out of them without really even consciously thinking about it. So noticing if a person's going to turn, or if a person's going the same way as you, making sure you don't collide. And I really think that this is kind of where listening and observing comes into play when we think about explicit and implicit messages. So there's a lot, the listening, especially in a public context. So for y'all's context, I sit at I'm in a front desk context at the library. I'm a face people see. I'm a person that they come to when they have questions or when they feel lost. So there's a lot of questions, signals, and signs coming from all directions. Sometimes people have very direct communication for me. They have a very specific request or question. They have a very clear body language, or they have very clear, like, I might overhear them say to a person, I'm looking for the computer lab, or I wonder if they have printing here. But sometimes it's unspoken. A lot of times it's unspoken. Someone will say to me a vague sentence such as, I'm looking for a book that I got in 2012. And I am like, that's great. Do you remember what was on it? Do you remember what it was about? So being willing to listen to patrons, and I think being more so willing to believe that there's more to a story. Listening helps me find the correct question to answer. So if the person who's looking for a book from 2012, maybe their question that they really have for me is that still here? Can I check that out still? Do you have the updated version of it? And so sometimes I need to ask a lot more questions to find the right answer. For me, in being at this job, I really learned that I'm motivated by finding answers and solving puzzles. So I tell a lot of patrons, I'm like, for me, this is like sleuthing. This is as close to Sherlock Holmes as I'll ever be. And that's pretty cool. It keeps me motivated at work. And I feel like it makes me a better library assistant and a better organizer. As an organizer, I get to dig in with people a lot more. My role is to find people's self-interests, which is the things that motivate them to come into certain spaces, that motivate them to share a common interest with me, to share a fight or a struggle or a campaign. So how can we help each other? And sometimes, a lot of people, including sometimes yourself, you might not know your self-interest. You might have changing self-interest. So being able to talk with a person and really ask them a lot of questions, like, what brings you here today? Oh, that sounds really interesting. Tell me more about the time that your family moved, and that was difficult. Like, we want to see what's underneath the stories or the things that we've filled in about ourselves. In both customer service and organizing, it has been an oft-repeated axiom to talk only 30% of the time and to listen to over 70% of the time, because that's where all, the juicy details are. Did I put them? No, I didn't. I made no part of such as. But some background about my jobs is a lot of my work has been public facing. I have always been in a customer service role, and when I was making these slides, I was really thinking about how this is being the first of the sub-competencies of communication. It's a lot less about responding and much more about finding the correct or appropriate way to respond. I did want to say that I definitely picked almost all of this up from one of my first jobs at Purdue, was in CELD office, which is now lead, and that was a decade ago. But being able to work in places as a student, working like in one place all 4 years, I learned so much from formal trainings and formal observations from my coworkers and supervisors. Working in CELD and feeling connected with a staff as existing student leaders made it easier to participate in leadership as a verb. Experiences like EMV or the Community Organizing Institute, which is where I've learned a lot of this information. I had never known what it meant to be I had never heard community organizer until I was exposed to that, and I'm still kind of confused as to how this has happened, but I'm very glad to be doing the work that I get to do with so many people. But being able to be in leadership as verb experiences helped me, I think a big part of that is about reflection. It's about the debrief, because it's not just about the action, it's not just about doing something, it's about what do we learn, what do we do next. And it was only through reflection that people were able to pull into the light this idea that observation and noticing things were skills. They're not just things that everybody, I think everybody has, to an extent, is always doing them. But you can't, it's harder to hone something and work on something if you don't even realize you're doing it. So what are we looking for? What are we listening for? We're looking for people's values, reactions or shifts in that conversation and energy in an organizing relationship, we want to be curious about those shifts. We want to be, and the only way we can be curious is if we're cognizant of them. If we're really watching our conversation partner, watching ourselves, and saying, what could this be? What kind of tunnel could this reaction be leading me down? Where is this coming from? It's like, oh, I noticed that you kind of paused there. Do you want to say more about this experience that you had? Do you want to tell me more about this thing that you were feeling? We want to ask open-ended questions because we want to pull up more information. Because, again, those self-interests can be really buried in there. I think it's asking for clarification is important. I have spent so much of my 30 years on Earth wondering if I've gotten something wrong and I know it seems simple, but just realizing that I could ask, is this what you meant by that? Has taken a lot of stress off of my shoulders. So I always tell people to, if you can, start practicing that, asking for clarification in your known relationships, because you might find that it is helpful. You might find it to be helpful in the future, and the only way to have that skill is to practice it when you can. So asking yourself, how am I interpreting a question or a statement that's being offered, even if it's from someone you know very well, and say, ask your conversation partner, I just want to double check that I'm interpreting you correctly, repeating what you think or what you believe that they have said or communicated. And I personally have been very surprised how sometimes those messages can get mixed in one's brain. Okay, so this is my favorite part. Non-verbal, non-tangible ways of communication. What are some common non-verbal, non-tangible things? So some previously discussed things like the way someone might react to a question or a story, but things like body language, like leaning in or away, things like we discussed when you're crossing the street, like noticing someone's hand, noticing someone like carrying something, and they might be looking like they need some assistance, sounds of agreement or disagreement. I love to be in spaces where the room's like, yes. Clapping, snapping in approval. But what are some not so common? Oh, I meant to ask, can you all think of any like common nonverbals that you come across?
Like I would say generally kind of like hands are a very kind of like large part of that. And like emotions as in like your face and all that.
Yeah.
Smiles.
Smiles.
Say hi.
Yeah, absolutely. Like smiling, presenting a relaxed or like positive energy is a huge nonverbal communication, especially in customer service. When we do phone banking, which is customer service adjacent, they say smile before you die because they can hear it. And I'm often the judge of that. Okay, but what are some not so common ones? Silence is a big, non-tangible piece of communication. Remembering a boundary, like remembering something important someone has told you, and acting accordingly, showing that you've learned something. Colors, this is called bisexual lighting. Lighting in general, that top picture makes me stressed out and I don't like that. The bottom off is much better. Settings or place, like planning an event or inviting someone over, and you might want to be mindful of how people can physically access a place, or like what is that setting like, because that communicates, maybe that can communicate your values or potentially could miscommunicate your relationship to that person. Or architecture, similar to the last one, physical spaces. Hostile architecture is a phenomenon of like often anti-poverty, anti-homelessness, or really just, but broadly anti-people, anti-public space ways of determining what is appropriate in a space. And that is definitely a communication of what a planner is valuing what like a city feels is the correct kind of interaction that should be outside. Can y'all think of any less common or any sub-examples of these? This one's harder. It was when I was writing this that I thought to myself, am I describing symbolism? So maybe that literature degree hasn't totally been forgotten. I definitely think that when we're reading or when we're interpreting text or poetry, these are things we look for to tell us like what is the author trying to convey, what is, I mean, if you've ever watched a movie with subtitles on, you'll definitely see the cue, ominous music. And it's like that is supposed to mean something to us. That is supposed to mean something to us as a consuming audience. Some other examples that I really like are brand guidelines. This is an example of my organization, Indiana Task Force's vibe lines that I made for this past merch launch, because we really wanted to think about like what did we want to communicate to new and current members? What were some of our values? What were some of the emotions we wanted to evoke with our color, with our use of colors, with our like imagery, with the presentation of how can we present our organization through, you know, a T-shirt, through a poster, through messaging. Curated, like photos, are also forms of communication. That might feel like it goes without saying. Social media, certainly, I feel like we know that's communication. Social media feels like, well, of course, that's communication. But I think that thinking about how social media is curated, not just as a person browsing, but as a person producing social media, it truly is production. It is saying, like, does this have a laser? Ooh, so like, how many people will be in this photo? How will they be posed? Where is our light? How are we displaying our, you know, papers correctly? Like, what can we communicate in snippets across somebody's phone or a page? And prioritizing that information that we want people to get. So we want people to know who's in the org. We want them to feel a sense of personal connection. People, like we've studied some faces, like people like faces. And I think it has being a person responsible for producing social media has really shown me the unconscious ways in which we make meaning from even what seems like a lack of a message. So in conclusion, communication represents choices. I really did want to underline when I was reading this that all methods and channels of communication represent choices we make or interact with. The messages we absorb and interpret as we move around the world, those messages are products of choices made by other people to create the reality we're navigating. So hostile architecture is my favorite example of that, but architecture in general. This building's a great example. I did not know if there was an elevator. I did not know if we would be seeing each other tonight because I was fully ready to call Jesus and say, I'm downstairs. I'll call in. Does that work? But what do those choices communicate to us as receivers from the building, from the past? But the messages we communicate to others, as well as how we communicate them, represent conscious but often limited choices. So sometimes our choice, both realms, how and what, are limited. And some choices may come easier to others, but effective communication is layered and multifaceted, in part because different people will resonate with different aspects of your communication sandwich. when I think about the intentionality and about what is possible behind tangible and like non-tangible aspects, I am reminded that if we can imagine and communicate an alternative and better future, then we can remake the current and make a new reality that we share. Career readiness. When I was doing my research into these, I did want to hit on this, but learning from others in my fields has taught me a lot of things, such as signals to look for, how best to structure a meeting, how best to structure, what are your follow-up questions. But the overarching lesson has been this: skills are acquired. They're not innate or inborn or necessarily predetermined by gender, sex, sexuality, star sign. Not everything I learn cements at the same time. Not every skill is going to manifest the same way in every person who's exposed to it. But I think it's important for when I talk to new organizers or even new reference assistants. It's like, I didn't come into this library knowing any of this information. Someone has taught it to me. No one taught me how to organize a union at my workplace. Well, that's not true, sorry. I was not born knowing how to organize a union at my workplace. Can you imagine? But someone has taught me the skills over the years, and it's only been through practice, trial and error, and like reflection and feedback with mentors and people who I feel like safe around, that those skills are built over time. So I did want to say, like I said, not everything I've ever learned has cemented at once. There are things that cement years down the line, which is to say, I'm sure there are things that y'all have picked up that may surface in time. And I hope you are feeling as excited about that as I am. Because I think it's kind of cool when you have an epiphany for yourself, where things start to make sense a little bit more. Thank you for listening so much. I really appreciate y'all's time tonight and attention. Thank you, Jesus and Jeremy, for letting me be here. And here's some of my information. If you want to follow me on Instagram, or if you have any questions about upcoming events. But also, if you want to get more involved, you can visit bit.ly/feminist-organizing to see upcoming events. Credits for the slides also.